So we're now a couple of episodes deep into our turbocharged 125cc fuel-injected kids quad bike build. Oh my god, that is a mouthful. In the last episode, we built our turbo manifold and mounted our tiny turbo. If you haven't seen the episode, go back and watch it. I'm super happy with where our turbo is mounted. It looks fantastic, and off camera, I've actually gone ahead and welded up our turbo manifold fully, so it's all welded now and it's mounted exactly where it's going to sit for the rest of the build. And I actually need to thank you guys. A bunch of you guys jumped into the comments and gave me a bunch of advice, and it has helped tremendously. So one of you guys said we should add a brace from the turbo manifold to the chassis, which we have now done. Quite a few people recommended that I get this plate for our turbo oil feed. So instead of running an oil pump to get the oil to the turbo, you guys recommended this plate, which is actually amazing. So this literally bolts in place of this right here, then gives us banjo bolts that we can bolt into here, and it'll send oil to the turbo, and then we can drain it back to the sump, which is freaking awesome. So thank you so much to everyone that suggested this. And lastly, one of you suggested that I should dummy up the ECU and everything and make sure it actually works before we continue on building all the rest of the piping and everything for the build, which is actually a great idea. I did not think of that. So that is exactly what we're gonna do. By the way, I read every single comment you guys throw down below. So if you have any advice or you just want to comment on the build, feel free to do so. I'll comment back to as many of them as I can. So if this all goes to plan, this should be a really exciting video because we're gonna dummy up our ECU onto the motor and start it for the first time. That is if everything goes as we are planning. So here's the loom that was on the motor currently to run it carbureted, and here is the loom that we have with our ECU. So these two actually work in conjunction with each other, and the challenge is going to be kind of wiring it up and getting it all working together. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to power up the ECU. We're going to plug it into our laptop, load up the software, and see if the ECU is actually going to talk to the computer and everything is working as it should be. So we're loading up the software, and the software that this stuff uses is called EFI Tune 2.25. Yes. Oof, look at that. So now we have to get the ECU connecting to the computer. So I've got the ECU sitting over here because I have our throttle body plugged in, and that's because I want to see whether the TPS is reading so basically when we load up the ECU and we get it to connect, we should be able to move that and kind of see on the computer the throttle position sensor should move at the same time. So we have our battery here, 12 volt, and the best thing about these is you can just power them up as they are right here. Whereas obviously on a car, it's a little more complicated to get it to kind of work. So I've got my ground on. Now we're going to throw the positive in. Oh, do you see that? The light went on there. So I think that means that our ECU is powered up. So the USB cable is currently plugged into the ECU here, and we're going to plug it into our computer. Click to test. Success! Alright, so it looks like we have life. So the engine map sensor is reading. It says we've got 12.6 volts, so the battery voltage is reading as well. Throttle position says at 1%, so now it should be the true test. So the true test will be, basically if we move this, alright, I'll show you guys the laptop, hopefully. Ready? Hey! So that's the throttle position sensor moving there, which means that it's reading it in real time. I know I said it before, but I'm literally blown away that is like, it's actually working. That's freaking mental. So we have the fuel hooked up, and please ignore how jiggy this setup is, but it's literally just for the purposes of starting it for the first time. But good news is, when I give the ECU power, the fuel pump primes, and fuel moves through the lines. So we have the line going from the tank into the pump, from the pump into the injector, and then we have a return line going back into the tank, because this is actually a sophisticated setup. It's not a carbureted setup, so they have a return line, which is pretty cool. So now is the less fun and more complicated part, and that's kind of wiring in the rest of it and hoping that I get the wiring right. So cross your fingers for me that this actually turns out to be correct, because wiring is definitely not my forte. So the world's most jiggy setup is now, I think, ready to go. And it was actually really simple. Basically, the old loom ran exactly as it was, unchanged, but the only thing I had to do different was there's this ignition wire that goes from the motor to the CDI, and that tells the engine to spark. That is now being controlled by the ECU. So instead of this going to here, it goes down into the ECU, back up and through the wire. That is all I changed. Other than that, the ECU gets power, it plugs into everything else, and then it's good to go. I've got my jumper pack on because our little 12 volt battery is starting to give up on life, because, you know, it's time tiny and I've had it connected for so long while I've been doing all this wiring. I'm actually a little bit nervous, but now is the moment of truth. So I'm gonna throw you guys on the tripod. I'm gonna see if this thing will actually start. Off camera, I've already checked and the injector is pulsing and we have spark. So now we have to see if this thing will actually run. Technically it should, if the settings are right in the ECU. Chances are the base mat won't be perfect or might not even be good enough to start it, so we're about to find out. I'm so friggin' pumped, let's go. Come on, come on. Holy shit. Woo! Scaring the crap out of me. All right, let's give it maybe a bit of throttle. So as you heard, we got some pops and bangs out of the thing, and that is actually a good sign, even though it didn't start. And that's because it means that we do have some fuel, and it means we do have some spark, and it means we have some explosion going up on in there. But now we need to get it all working properly, and I'm not very good at this stuff, so I have the wizard, the guru, Bailey on the FaceTime. My man. So Bailey's pretty much helping me work my way through the software. Not that he really knows exactly how it works either, because it's kind of foreign. And basically we've worked out, because the spark plug was wet when I pulled it out, that we need to go leaner. So we're just going down with the W's, all the way down. It's not an exact science at this point.
No, it's just ballparking it till it works.
Whew. All right, so it is now 2 p.m. the next day in the afternoon, and I've been fiddling around with this thing for most of today. As I said, hooking up the ECU and everything was actually super easy, but getting it to run, a whole nother story. Most of that does come down to my ability to work the software and actually know what I'm doing, which I don't, by the way. But look at this monstrosity of a setup we have going at the moment. Like, this is an absolute nightmare. But like I said, this is just dummy fit, obviously. We're gonna make it beautiful, nice and tidy when it's all done. But I'm gonna show you guys how I finally got this thing to crank over. So what it came down to was the trigger offset in the ignition. I thought that that would come preset for the motor, because the person I bought the kit off asked for all the flywheel pictures and stuff like that. So I stupidly assumed that they would have had that preset. So I've been fiddling with fuel and everything all day, but it turned out that was the problem. And before any of you guys panic, I have put oil in the turbo. I did fill the oil feed for the turbo with oil, and it will go through the turbo. So we're not dry starting it, because I know a bunch of you guys will jump in the comments and tell me off for starting this thing without having oil in the turbo, but I've got you covered. I got your back. We're all good. All right, are you ready? So we turn it on. Fuel pump's priming, and it should theoretically start. Damn it! You were running so well before. So I've been playing around with the timing light. This has been such a frickin' journey. I'll sit you guys down for a second, but basically you'll see I hold the timing light and start it. So basically, after a bunch of tests, so I had the timing pretty much in a ballpark of where it should run, but the problem is actually somehow with the ECU and the fact that it's not sending enough of the spark signal to the CDI. I had a quick chat to Bailey before, and he's told me it's fine to run the setup back on our old ignition setup for now. I'll see if I can do some research and see exactly what the problem is, but for now, we're gonna run it off the old ignition. So we've got it hooked back up to the normal ignition way now, and all it does is send a signal to the ECU from that to tell the injector when to inject the fuel. So now technically it should run. Just like that. So as you can see, it runs really freaking nicely, and that is without any real fuel tuning either, so I'm freaking stoked with that. And the best thing is, it's spooling the turbo just on idle. I can feel compressed air coming out of the turbo just on idle, which is absolutely amazing because I think that means we've pretty much nailed the size of the turbo. We won't know that for sure, obviously, until we get this thing actually running and spooling up. But now that it's running, we can finally move on from this and start fabricating our exhaust. I absolutely cannot work with this mess on the table, so we're about to clear that out. Ready? Bit of YouTube magic. 3, 2, 1. Oh, that is so much less stressful. And now we're gonna make our frickin' exhaust.
So it's time to dive into our SP Tools kit and grab our electric ratchet so we can unbolt the turbo.
Whoops. Sorry, turbo. So the turbo actually came with a V-band on the back of it, but it was a very weird style of V-band because it was off a turbo diesel car. So what I've done is I actually cut the back off that V-band so that we can use half of our V-band, and it literally just sits on perfectly like that. That way I don't have to weld anything onto the back of the turbo housing, and we can have it look as neat as possible, which is super nice. Success! Our genius idea worked. Look at this. Super tidy. Didn't have to do any welding to get the V-band on the back. Looks very nice, and now we can move on to the rest of the exhaust. So we're about to get real fancy with it. To build this exhaust, we're gonna be using stainless pie cuts. The way we're gonna make our 90-degree bends on this exhaust is instead of using bends, we're gonna make the bend using a pie cut. So that's a bunch of these little things going together like a jigsaw puzzle, and you just keep adding them until you get a nice corner. You TIG them all together, and it looks real nice and fancy, especially if you get the TIG welding super nice. I'm a complete rookie when it comes to TIG welding. I have tried a little bit. I did the screamer pipes on our E36 turbo drift car here. It didn't turn out too bad, but because I want the setup to look like super nice, I'm not gonna weld the whole thing together. But what I am gonna do is I'm gonna tack the whole exhaust together today, make it all, and then I'll give it to Bailey, and he's gonna do his fancy welding stuff and just make it look absolutely beautiful.
So it's time to put our fabrication skills to the test. Once we're happy with how the pie cuts fit together, I'm using masking tape to hold the shape. Then, it's a rinse and repeat process as we fit the pie cuts together to create the perfect bend for our dump pipe.
So here she is, the first one. Time to lay down some tacks. Wish me luck. So we have our first bunch of pie cuts welded together. And this is one of those builds where every little bit you add, the build just gets better and better. Look at that, that looks so freaking good. There's just something about pie cuts. I just freaking love it. It looks so good. And jumping on that TIG welder, so freaking satisfying. I literally could sit there for hours listening to podcasts and just doing TIG welding. In saying that, all I'm doing is pulsing. I'm not using filler because I am an absolute rookie. But now we've got our dump coming to here. Basically, the next aim is to come straight down here, and then I've already tacked together another little bunch of pie cuts just to kind of figure out the length that I need for the piece of straight that's gonna come through here, because we're gonna cut a piece of straight, it'll come down, and then we're gonna have this wee guy. It'll be more of a 90 once I'm finished with it. I'll add some more pie cuts to it, and we're gonna basically try and sneak down and through here. I'm obviously wary that the clutch and stuff is in here, so I don't want the exhaust too close to this casing. I don't know whether that affects it or not in terms of, you know, heating it up. I've unbolted this back wheel because we're actually going to be widening the cart. So I unbolted the wheel, slid it that way so that the exhaust has more room to come through out the back. And then of course, I'm definitely going to be doing a wee lobster dump tip at the back. It should look absolutely insane.
I decided to clearance the foot plates as it's in the way of where I want the exhaust to go, and I want to redesign the foot plates in the future anyway. Then we take our measurements, mark our cuts, and get cutting. The cuts have to be perfectly flat or they're really difficult to TIG weld. I'm definitely not used to this, as you can get away with a lot more gaps when you're MIG welding, so this definitely tested my patience. But once we're happy with how it all fits together, it's time to get welding.
I'm way too hyped on this build right now. Your boy has been cooking. So the first part of the dump is on, and now we're moving on to the second part. So basically this guy is gonna go here. Look at that. God damn, that looks good. I think I'm just way more stoked as well because I did this. Like, this is definitely way outside of my fab skills. So next up, we're gonna measure up a straight that goes about from here to here before it's gonna dip down again and go under here.
When you're fabricating an exhaust, it's a revolving workflow of installing, measuring, marking, removing, cutting, and welding. And it's a seriously time-consuming process, even when you're building a small go-kart exhaust. But if you can muster up the patience, it's a super rewarding process.
The last piece of the puzzle. Boom. Let's go. That is so freaking good. So I've fitted the exhaust for the final time, and I've got to say, I'm so damn proud of the work that I've achieved over the last couple of days. Definitely way outside of my skill set and skill level, but this looks absolutely insane. And it has taken the kart to a whole new level. Check this out. Take a look at that. Holy crap. How epic does that look? I'm really happy with the direction we decided to take with it. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I'm definitely gonna remake the foot plates and have them a little further away so that we're not anywhere near the exhaust, obviously, when we're riding it. We'll also obviously make some kind of heat shrouding as well, but like that just looks absolutely fantastic. And it definitely makes the kart look super tough, which is awesome. Look at that, so good. Now we need to get our hands on our front mount intercooler, which I thought would have shown up by now, but I think it arrives tomorrow, which is unfortunately too late for this video, but so freaking stoked. Can't wait to see this all final welded as well. I'm still tossing up whether we put a flex or not in the exhaust. Most likely we will. We might end up chucking one maybe here. And I still need to put a mount on the back of the exhaust, and then we'll have some rubber so that it just mounts so that when it flops around, obviously, it doesn't crack all the welds and stuff, but like that, just 10 out of 10, over the moon, freaking stoked. Easily some of the best work we've ever done. Well, it definitely is on this drift car, and it's just come to a whole new level. Now all you have to imagine is a front mount intercooler with all the pie cuts, TIG welded stainless going into our throttle body, silicon joiners. This thing is gonna be absolutely mental. I'm stoked that we've got proof of concept with the ECU now as well. If you guys have any ideas as to why I was struggling to get it sparking properly with the ECU, feel free to throw your ideas in the comments below. We're gonna keep pushing forward with this. There's still a bunch of jobs to get done. It's basically like building a car, but in a miniature version. It takes the same amount of work and it's mental, but thank you guys so much as always for the support. I appreciate the hell out of each and every one of you. I will see you in the next video. Lots more work to do. I'll see you then. Cheers guys, peace, bye. This go-kart has better fabrication than our race car now. What the hell? Bye.